Good morning, Banana Mater. I am in Newfoundland right now. So excited. I'm in quarantine though, so I can't go anywhere. Less exciting. While my husband is trying to find us a house to live in Nova Scotia, we are staying here in Newfoundland in quarantine for 14 days. So I should have a little bit of time to record videos. Or I have to make small talk with my mother-in-law. She's nice. She's a nice lady. So last week we were doing a little bit of perspective and you're like, it was interesting. That was one of the videos I did that wasn't super specific to Harmony Premium animators particularly interested in special effects or compositing. And nobody watched it. It was one of my least popular videos in a long time. But it was important because today's episode is going to be about using perspective for your characters. I didn't want anybody who was a little bit left, behind in their perspective to feel like they couldn't appreciate this lesson. So I thought that was an important thing to start with. So here's our character. Let's say we're in a 1-point perspective scene. This is very common. You get a lot of 1-point perspective scenes in animation. So let's say here is our pivot point. I'll do a little plus. Working on a smaller Cintiq, and I don't have a second monitor, so I hope I'm recording. I checked and I am. Usually I can see myself over here, which is why I'm like, I can see. So if we have blue and we have another character in the scene here, we want to be able to use a perspective. So I'm looking at the top of his head under his floof. We have a second character in the scene. We want him to be next to him in perspective. We use that vanishing point. So this is a very severe perspective. But if you have severe perspective in your scene, you want your characters to have severe perspective as well. If you have very chill perspective, then you want your characters to be chill, right? So we get a lot of revisions for animators for stuff like that. It's like, oh, he's walking towards you or away from you in the scene. How big should he be? How small should he be? This is how you're going to do it. You're going to use that vanishing point. You're going to be more careful than me. Look at this. That's a fail. Let's just, there you go. And you're going to make sure your character goes away in perspective. You're like, yeah, Tracy, I know this. Why is this? What about the X? Well, we also can use the X for putting characters into serious perspective. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a side view. This character was used for some other stuff. I actually used this character for the texture episode, so I had to remove all these textures from his clothes. I could have just went and found a clean rig of blue, but why would I do that? So let's say you have this big perspective scene, but your character has to be going back in perspective like this. Oh no, now I've got to jam this dude into perspective. This is going to be really scary. And he has this crazy pose. So how, Tracy? So what I'm going to do, I'm going to take a 3/4 blue. Look at that. Why? And we're going to put him in perspective. I'm going to do a really bad job because some of this stuff can be a little bit tedious, right? So first of all, this is the pose we want. And a lot of people don't realize when you're doing character rotations, you do that line thing, yeah? So you put all your lines across and your character's head stays in the same place and his body and his legs. Yay, I'm circling perspective. But this also works for foreshortened crazy poses. What we're going to do is put blue in perspective, looking towards the camera with his arm outstretched. Maybe he just has this foot pointed. I don't have to muck around with his ankle because this is not the main pose. We just need to see where our main pose is going to be, right? So we know his head needs to be about here. Our storyboard artist gave us a pretty good starting point. We can use these points to figure out where his head goes. First of all, we can use this for the scale. Just copy and paste it. Since we didn't share a peg there, we could have just copied the peg over. Ugh, my back it's a long flight. All right. So here is his head. His chin is here. And we can actually do the lines to rotate our character across this way. Or we can just use our character. So let's use some of those lines we were talking about. Give us a couple of guidelines. I'll add more as I need them. Here's his shirt. Here's his knee. His toes. And actually I'm going to take another blue aside, right? So we're going to take this blue and break it up. Now when you're doing your X's on a thing like this, you want to make sure you have some vertical lines as reference. You want to have a square so that when you draw your X, it's going from the corner to corner to something. Whoa. So blue's halfway point is just above his crotch, above his chin. There's no proportions here. It's not correct proportions. It's not like cartoony proportions. He just has awkward proportions. Now we're going to take our thing and we're going to put it in perspective. So here's his single quarter unit. We're going to bring our box back this way. And this is the perspective we're going to use. So our halfway point of our character is going to be here. See? So this part of the character belongs here in perspective. His feet belong here in perspective. So let's start by just jamming our guy into that box, and then we will adjust. So these poses can take quite a bit of time. Often they're done as what are called special poses, or like the rig is actually adjusted by someone who has a little bit more experience. But often this stuff is done with special pose. Okay, so here's our head move. And when you're looking down at a character, okay, first of all, your shoulders come up behind your head. This is something often gets neglected. So that's why we have our side view character. You can see that the back of Blue's neck needs to be up here. Let's make sure it's on the right layer. Here's where the back of Blue's neck is going to be. And here's where the front of his collar is going to be. So it's actually much higher than we have here. In this case, I think I'm just going to detach his head from his body. So it's not often that you re-rig a character as you're animating, but in this case, I think having the head attached to the body is going to be very detrimental to our mental health. There we go. So now if I want to move his whole body up, I can separately. And then we can kind of, if we want to see a little bit of the collar, that's kind of a judgment call we can decide on. But we're going to take the arm and move it forward like this. So now his shoulders are hunched up behind his back. You're going to get some really ugly stuff happening along the way. It's just when you smash character like this, it's going to look like that. We have our elbow position here again. And you take your time. This pose is going to be animatable once it's in its position. You're going to be able to do some little poses along the way, but getting it into the position, you have to take the time to do everything, follow your hierarchy. There we go. And then his hand position's a little bit more flexible. So I think I have a fronty hand. Then his other hand, I didn't really spend a lot of time on that, but we're going to bring that forward as well. Oh, your thumb touches your cheek. So his thumb has to be on that side. Do I have one a little less? Yeah, that'll do. All right. Now we're gonna bring this torso up. Keep an eye on in here. So here's your chest. If it goes up, it's gonna take a lot of other stuff. So I'm just gonna move it like this. And we have a single deformer chain up the belly in this version of Blue. This is one of the places where an envelope deformer is more useful, but because this is such a rare occasion, I prefer that single deformer chain for keeps things a little lighter, and you can use it for most things. And then if I have a view like this, I will just go in and either adjust the torso or add in an envelope deformer because it takes like 3 seconds. Some people really just love envelope deformers on everything. I think that they have a useful time. It's just because of the weight of them, I don't like to use them all the time. That's just me. We all have our favorite things. My friend is the lead rigger at a big company here. She like oversees all the riggers on all the shows. She's like a big deal. And she hates my rigging template. She's like, why is it shaped like a little human? Why isn't it? Because like I have my head at the top. I have my arms, like I have this like clump of things. I like things really close. I don't like to do this when I'm going through my thing, but hers is in a line, a very neat, tidy line. She doesn't like mine. So we all have our favorite things. So we might need to like shrink down his little, no, I think that's okay. Now remember over here, we can see where our belly needs to be. It's at the halfway point. So in this serious perspective here, the halfway point is here, but this is a box. So let's just look at this. Let's just look at this person, this thing here. So when we're looking at Blue, it's actually more like this, going back to that vanishing point. I don't know where it is. So Blue's belly button would be here, but like vertically. So if his little belly was in this box, it's 1 point perspective box, the center of his little stomach would be here. And then you could draw your little tubey legs going back into perspective like this. Okay. Well, we can see that that's our halfway point. And we could look here and we can compare. So even though here it's calling for the stomach to be up, his belly is like this. Like he's not fully back this way. So his belly is going to be touching the center of this line. I hope that makes sense. So that's his belly if his body was straight back, but because he's tilted, his belly button can actually rest here on the center line. And again, you can find the center of the box by using your X, following through on your perspective, and you can find the center of that X. You'll get better at seeing the center of things. I'm getting very messy. I gave him way too, like his pecs here are like massive. He's a really skinny little tube man. His pelvis, you can't even see it. If you look over at this drawing, his pelvis is inside the tube. So if you rotated that tube like this, you wouldn't see it. You just see his little legs sticking out. So if we wanted to, we could just hide the pelvis in behind here. We don't have to deal with it. And then we could look, here's his knee. So his knee is coming up as high as that, but it's foreshortened severely. So we'll bring our thing here. And then we might need to just redraw feet on this one. And we have to shrink the knee down so that he has little feet. Oh, that one doesn't look too bad, actually. That looks okay. Now, the details, you want to add details. So what I'm going to do is I'm creating a new drawing. I'll chip D on this foot, and I'm going to turn, we're actually going to give it a little bit of a perspective here. If we know we're not animating it, we could add a back to this, but since it's just going to be held in place, I can cheat a little back here. See, so he's getting perspective on his foot, and we want to see the back of his heel. This is usually where junior animators fall apart. They'll just kind of shove things into the right place, and then they won't add any perspective on it, and it looks really cheap. I mean, it is cheap, but you don't want it to look cheap. And then the other one is sticking out straight, but we want it to shrink down. So again, we might need to change our drawings up a little bit because we don't have a pointed toe. We want this to be shorter, a whole bunch shorter. If it's, and this severe of a perspective, it's oftentimes they'll just redraw the item because you want it to taper really well. I wouldn't go in with the perspective tool or anything, but a quad map, you're going to get a lot of line distortion. So sometimes just drawing things is your best bet. And then you're going to want a foot that's properly perspectived. So in this case, I would rotate, I'd use those lines again to rotate the shoe, and then a layer above it, I'd clean it up. I'm going to use the brush tool. I should use the line tool, but I want to do this pretty quick. Cleaning up with the brush tool is faster for me. If you use the line tool, you can adjust your line thickness because this is not uniform. Calling that good enough for a little demo here. And depending how small it is, you can get away with some pretty shoddy work. Boop, 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 that's brown. Again, if you're gonna be doing a lot of animation with this, it's worth putting an overlay and underlay for the shoe. If it's going to be bending or doing stuff like this, you want to be a little bit more careful with stuff like this. But I just kind of want to show you the perspective ideas that are going to help you. And this is a very important part here. Okay, so here, again, this arm is where baby animators fall flat. Like literally, they'll just give us a flat pose like this. They'll be like, haha, foreshortening. I did it. But this sleeve, if you take just the minute it takes to add a new drawing and then give some perspective to this actual sleeve, that's going to really make you stand out. This is something that so many juniors just don't bother with, is to put in the drawing substitutions to get this arm really coming forward. We can shorten this up. You can make the hand bigger and then line it up. Make sure we don't have any ugly seams. And in this case, I think I would erase a little bit of the line on the hand here just to give it a little bit. After all of that, so once you're finished, you go through and you tidy up any little inconsistencies. You want to get this sleeve going around, and you can put a sleeve in the back. Do we have one in the back? Color art, upper arm, sleeve. So what I can do, I have my underlay available. I'm going to grab my layer selectors, put an underlay in. I'm not going to be lazy. If this is your prime pose for this entire scene, don't be lazy. Put in something like this. Put it on your underlay layer, and you can even make it a little bit Just a little bit of a shadow. Hopefully my sound is recording okay. I was having a lot of trouble with that earlier. His sleeve is sort of billowing, and especially if he's like falling into like down through clouds and stuff, then having a little billowy sleeve is really gonna, you know, his torso's too long. It should be, let's see, let's actually bring it. So we want to bring it over this way and then shrink down. Because I brought it over because over here you can see where that should be. And we just, again, don't want to give him too much muscle. He's just a tube, a lonely tube, falling through the sky. And his pelvis needs to be hidden. Shrink it down. You can just hide it behind his stomach. Alright, so because I brought his chest in, I have to bring his collar in. You might not even see it. I did a really bad job cleaning up his shirt, but there we go. This is starting to look perspective-y. Ooh, so he's looking down. Alright. Yeah, so that's, I'm just gonna stop mucking about with this. His leg is looking a little fat sausage. But you're going to want to go through and make sure these like tubes really taper down. You can't be afraid to do drawing substitutions here and to fix the things. Like, don't be afraid to smash this rig up to add drawing substitutions and to taper things really severely. I mean, you could even put this entire leg on one drawing if you wanted to, and that would help you. You can bring it in even more like this and put it behind him. Okay, so that was kind of a shoddy looking blue. His torso looks really long. I should have brought it up more. It's because he's so poorly proportioned. But hopefully you saw how like perspective is helpful here. Like you can see where his body's going to be in perspective. Like as I was playing with it, I kind of brought it more. I brought my box around. Let me see. So this is the box I started with, which ended up looking not very much like a box at all. But then I ended it with a box that was steeper, so something closer to this. But when your box is steep like this, you can still use this to say, okay, this is about halfway. Whatever the character's halfway point has to be inside of this part of the box here. Then the feet have to be somewhere around here, and the head, the nose, say, has to be around here. Using the X is not just for background designers, it's for everybody. You can find, it can help you figure out these super hard poses. And using the character rotation, like the guidelines, you can use that for poses as well as your character turnaround. It's not just for that. All this technical geekery is going to help you get those poses down, which is super important in 2D. You can't just turn your character in 2D. It doesn't happen. You have to know your perspective. And the better you learn this stuff, even if you don't draw it, even if you just kind of have a familiarity with using these perspective boxes, it's going to help you do these really hard poses and get you up into that pro level. And that's it. Yeah. So like, share, subscribe, all those things internet people ask you to do. And I will see you in the next episode.